everyone, Andrew from WiZDOM here, and this is the fourth video in the What Should I Do Next series. In the previous videos, we talked about the considerations that you should be thinking about before you make these kinds of decisions, and we've been steadily building up a person's portfolio from there, starting quite modest. The next step was a little bit less modest. We basically gave them a bunch more current available equity, and that brought in some different styles of deals that they can consider. And essentially, this next step is another step towards that again. So this one I've referred to as building your portfolio. So what I mean by that is that we've sort of come out of the starter phases or those really modest situations, and we're starting to get into a situation that we see really, really regularly. And this is actually one of the trickier ones, because generally speaking, people that are in this situation, which just broadly, I've said sort of $200,000 or thereabouts plus, it does get more and more difficult to track income and what that means for overall borrowing power, particularly because quite often people in this situation will already have property in their portfolio. They'll already have to be carrying existing debt on that. And so it starts to get very tricky about what their borrowing power would translate to. But I've increased overall current available equity again to now 200,000. And what does that mean? So the first step was 10,000. The second video was 80,000, and now we're at 200,000. So again, a person in this situation may already have a property in the portfolio. They've paid down some debt. They've had capital growth. They've gone through the getting market ready process with their WiZDOM professional to be able to make that available to them. And they're now in a situation where 200,000 is available. So what does that mean? Well, exactly like all of the previous videos, of course, all of the strategies that I've spoken about to up until now would absolutely be available to a person in this situation as well. So we spoke about doing joint ventures, doing vendor joint ventures, and of course, in the last one, we introduced a really low-end renovation. Now, I lent on renovation in that video because we were trying to make sure that we had a good amount of strategy cost available to us to execute on that strategy really quickly. So what difference then does it make when we look at a little bit more borrowing capacity and a little bit more equity? Well, what I find most people in this situation want to do is they immediately want to jump to cash flow strategies. And as I've said previously, that's really difficult, because if you take this capital and invest that into a cash flow strategy, well, the likelihood is we won't get that money back. And so the issue then becomes, well, what do you do beyond that? What is how are you going to be able to continue your property journey? How are you going to be able to continue to move forward? And I appreciate there's also lots of answers to that as well, because there's lots of opportunity out there. But what I find most people want to do is not necessarily go and do a cash flow property and then immediately have to go and do joint venture deals beyond that to start to build up their capital again. So in situations like this, it's absolutely my recommendation that people stick to those manufactured growth strategies and continue to build that capital amount up higher. But with a larger amount of money here available to us in the amount of 200,000, it does open up some higher end manufactured growth strategies to us, or at least some modest manufactured growth strategies to us. Up until this point, we only spoke about doing a very low purchase price regional property or potentially metro property. With an amount of $200,000, we can start looking at different types of manufactured growth strategies and potentially at different price points as well. So again, just breaking that down for you, how would I look at that 200,000? Well, I would probably cut out $50,000 maybe as our strategy cost. And again, you could crank that up a little bit, but it will impact your purchase price. And that would leave us with $150,000 available to go into our property, which, as I've said previously, at an 80% lend translates to 25% of our purchase costs, which means that we would be able to buy a property of up to $600,000. So with our 200,000, it means we could be buying a $600,000 property and still have in the bank available to us our $50,000 to execute on our strategy, which I think is quite a reasonable budget for a very modest renovation. Of course, a very extensive renovation might be double that, and that would impact our purchase price. And it also probably introduces is a reasonable strategy for, a reasonable amount of money to be able to look at a subdivision in most of Australia, maybe not enough for Queensland because it's very expensive to subdivide in Queensland. So what does that mean for us? And what does that mean what types of deals we could be looking at with this amount of money? Well, as I've said previously, you can do all the other deals. But for me, what it does is a couple of things. We're starting to talk about better locations. You know, we would like to think that not every metro area of Australia, but we're sort of fringe metro in most places in Australia, and potentially some of those outer lying suburbs where good opportunity can lie in those suburbs as well. It doesn't have to be, you know, within a kilometre of the city, although we would very much like that. And I think it also introduces a different type of deal as well. So absolutely, we could be doing a renovation on that property with our $50,000 reno budget. We could also be looking at subdivision, as I said. And another strategy that potentially you could be doing at this kind of price point, it would be a little bit tight, but if we kept the numbers modest, you could even be potentially looking at a knockover and rebuild. So what I mean by that is you buy a terrible property, you know, or a terrible existing property that is on a really good piece of dirt, and you simply knock that house over, build a nice new home on that, and as a result of that, you can increase profitability or create profitability out of that, because people in that area are willing to pay good money for nice built, done homes in good locations as well. So from a strategy perspective on manufactured growth strategies, you know, even with a relatively modest amount, you could be looking at those types of deals. Now, if you really needed to push on your borrowing power to be able to, or your buying power to be able to get into a potentially more expensive suburb, or you need to set aside more strategy cost, well, of course, considerations for you would also include maybe you could be pushing into lender's mortgage insurance territory, relying on your good income and your borrowing position to be able to do that. And as a result of that, you would be able to potentially push your borrowing power further again. Now, one other consideration, I guess, when we're looking at these kind of deals is the consideration of, are you doing this deal as a principal place of residence, or are you doing it as an investment? And of course, they have pros and cons. It is absolutely wonderful from overall tax perspective to be able to do these types of deals as a principal place of residence, because the second you are buying it in your personal name, which is important for capital gains tax, and you are living in that property whilst you're executing a manufactured growth strategy, to be able to come out of that property having made, you know, great money and then not have to be exposed to capital gains tax can obviously really supercharge your journey really early on. An important thing to understand in that, though, is that the ATO are very aware of what they refer to as trading in your principal place of residence. So there is specific legislation that says you are not allowed to just keep flipping your principal place of residence, because essentially that's not the intent of the capital gains tax-free environment. It's not so that you can, you know, create a business flipping your principal place of residence and not pay tax on that. That wasn't the intent of the law. So when it comes to, if you are going to do principal place of residence deals, the reality from my perspective is I don't mind if you do a deal relatively quickly, but then you need to be a little bit careful about how quickly you replicate that, and very important when it comes to the third deal. Now, of course, this isn't tax advice, it's just practical experience, where if you are flipping 3 properties in 3 months, of course, the ATO is going to have an issue with that. But let's say you went in and did a renovation and that took you 6 months while you were living there, because of course you need a roof over your head anyway. And then you decided to go into another property, and maybe that one was a little bit slower. Maybe it was a subdivision and a renovation, and that one sort of took you a year or a year and a half. And then you're going into your third, and maybe that's a more significant deal again. That's the kind of periods of time where I would be much more comfortable with there being genuine and reasonable reasons as to why you stayed in those properties for those periods of time, and less likely to raise the ire of the ATO and you ending up with a tax bill that you weren't anticipating. It is important to understand that if the ATO does come and effectively accuse you, or they make the judgment that you are trading in your principal place of residence, they will go backwards on all of your properties as well. So it's not just a case of this one was fine. It's a case of if ever you trigger trading in your principal place of residence, they will actually go backwards on your properties as well. So that's one consideration for you. Am I discouraging you from doing these deals as principal place of residence? No, of course not. It's just a consideration about how quickly you intend to do these deals. And of course, you always have the opportunity to be able to do the deals as investment. If you own the property for longer than 12 months, you are going to get your 50% discount on capital gains tax, even if you own that property via a trust. There are obviously some things that you need to manage there, but there is obviously no issue with you whatsoever having as many investment properties as you like, and obviously turning those properties over as often as you like. If you go into a short-term deal like a renovation and you don't own the property for greater than 12 months, you obviously are going to be exposed to full capital gains on that property as well. But just because we're sort of starting to introduce the type of deal which I think would make a reasonable principal place of residence property as well, I thought it was really valuable to talk about that. I think people at this point in their journey, it is a genuine consideration for them, although, no problem with sticking that as an investment property as well. Now, as I said at the very start, because we have limited capital here, we don't necessarily want to be focusing on cash flow strategies. We should be focusing on manufactured growth strategies and building this capital situation up. That doesn't mean that there aren't cash flow strategies available to you that, again, are relatively low capital and everything else. But those cash flow strategies I'd be looking at are the ones that we've had available to us from the start, where you could operate as a deal finder, no problem whatsoever if you're great at doing that. You could look at lease and lease, you could look at executive rental, you could look at managing or leasing properties and putting them out and managing them on Airbnb. They are all great cash flow strategies. They are very low capital. And as a result of that, you could be working on those types of deals to build your cash flow up on the side. Honestly, what I find is most people don't necessarily do that, but there are plenty of people that do that really well, build that cash flow up while they're doing their manufactured growth strategy to be able to, build their capital position up as well. So from a, phase one of building portfolio perspective, when you're in a similar financial situation to this, for me, they're the great types of deals that we're now looking at, and you could consider as part of potentially your next deal, depending on your situation and your circumstance. I look forward to bringing all of the next positions to you and working through all of that with you as well. Until then, happy investing and bye.